Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I am so excited. It's such a beautiful piece, Rita.
It is.
Just very powerful, very moving. Wanted to know, because you are the writer as well as director, producer. You've done Marian Anderson, you've done Maya. Why did you decide to take this next step here?
Well, thank you, and I want to thank everybody for coming. I know that you could have done a lot of other things, and I've got 9 blocks of Phoenix in here. I've got my golf girls and family and people that worked on the film, my sister, thank you. I want to say that this documentary came to me, and most of my projects do that. So I had co-directed Maya Angelou, and that led me to Marian Anderson. And then I had always wanted to know my history. When I saw people on the television, dynamite and all that kind of thing, that's fine. But that's not who I grew up with. And I said, where are my people? And it seemed that I felt God said, show them yourself. And so I was working for Oprah Winfrey. I was working in Maya Angelou's home for 4 years, from 2006 to 2010. I would go down and I would take my equipment, and then she said, you can stay in my home. Well, who was giving that up? And I would be there with her to do 4 programs so that she'd have 1 program a month on Oprah Radio. And she was talking to me about W.E.B. Du Bois one day, and I could see in her realization that I didn't know much about him, that she was sad. And when an older Black woman looks at you that way, you kind of grab yourself. And I started reading about him. I never had an African American history course. So when this documentary came up on a website under American Masters, I said, I want it, and I will learn what I don't know, because I figured most people were like me. They didn't know much about him either. And so I felt that I could learn and I could find the people to tell the story.
Right.
And that's how it started.
Right. It is, my entry to him was, I don't agree, said W.E.B. So that was in school. And I had periphery knowledge of him, but learned about him more once I got to college. How about yourself? What was your entry?
My entry was primarily Rita approached me and she told me about the project that she was working on.
Yes.
And I happened to be working on a series of monumental sculptures and paintings from a Black historical perspective. As a result, as almost a response to the George Floyd death.
Yes.
Consequential tearing down of romanticized monuments, and the absence of our story and our narratives in the public space. And so I'm working on this series of pieces, and Rita's familiar with my work, and when she came by and we talked about this project, and it just, the synergy was there, and one of the figures that's part of this monument series, amongst many, including Obama and Kamala Harris and Frederick Douglass and on, was Du Bois. And his idea of this double consciousness, which we all experience as Black people. And it for me, it represented an opportunity to be able to expound more upon that aspect of who he was and who we are today.
Right. And it seems that your work is about suiting art to purpose.
Yes, yes. From the vantage point that much of our contemporary experience is based on historical, life.
Mm-hmm.
But when you don't make that connection, it's a lot harder to understand today. Watching this film and many of the political movements and things that went on in the past,
Right.
you can see that reflected today in
Right.
the policies and the attitudes. And so understanding that history is vital. And I think that's what artists, can bring to the table.
Right. Very important that we understand where we came from to see how we got here today. Mr. Alden.
Well, I first went to.
Thank you. I attended Olive Harvey Community College, and I had a black professor who told us about Du Bois and had us to read a few pieces by Du Bois, and that's when I first learned about the great rivalry between Booker T. Washington and W.B. Du Bois. And then I went to college, Bradley University, then the State University of New York at Stony Brook, and I thought that I was going to learn a great deal more about Du Bois, having been introduced to him in community college in Chicago. Well, lo and behold, I learned nothing about Du Bois at Bradley University. I was studying for a PhD in sociology, and I never had to read anything about Du Bois in the graduate program. But by then, I knew I'd started to read Du Bois on my own. And I made the decision that Du Bois, after all, was a sociologist. And I was studying to be a sociologist. And I said, there is somebody that looks like me and other black people who are getting advanced degrees. And that person was, for me, W.B. Du Bois. And so that's how I got involved. And then I made a decision that I was going to study Du Bois's life, his work, his activism, and so forth. And so for the last 15 years, I've been doing just that, studying and writing about Du Bois.
And with students, what would be a recommendation for you in terms of how they would begin to study him?
Well, I think, first of all, I think this came through in the film somewhat. Du Bois wrote 21 books. He wrote thousands of articles that included plays, novels, poems, and scholarly studies. And we saw where he put on all of these big shows and so on and so forth. So you do have to make a decision about where do I enter to try to understand Du Bois. And I certainly would always recommend The Souls of Black Folk, one of the most powerful and beautiful books ever written about black people and about race and so on. I think, and certainly the Philadelphia Negro, the Crisis magazine is completely online now. You can read all these articles in the Crisis magazine. One of the things I do want to say is that it's important, I think, for us to understand that Du Bois was raised poor. His father left when he was a toddler. His mother was a domestic who was poorly paid. The community, largely white community, had to raise funds to send him to Fisk University. And in that sense, Du Bois was the first recipient of a GoFundMe campaign. And so I think that you start with a lot of his basic work, read some of his poems, read The Souls of Black Folks, read The Philadelphia Negro, and many, many other works, and just grow from there. Because the body of work is so huge. It is amazing. I personally try to think about how can one person write all of this work, start and be a participant in all of these major movements of the 20th century, a quasi playboy. How do you accomplish all of this? And so, yes, that's what I would just say. Just start looking into his work and pick out pieces and go from there.
Yes, and I think this film is essential
I do
to
too.
beginning to know who he is. Has covered his whole life, and it's a complex, richly layered life, starting with beginning of the Proclamation of Emancipation, his beginnings to his end with the March on Washington. What you covered with this with such specificity, with passion, is an incredible achievement. Wanted to know then, how did you decide where to begin with this film?
I think that when you look into history, one of the things that you have to do is you have to realize that the work that was written on Black people is always going to be lacking, because who was writing history, just like Reconstruction, it wasn't there. So you need to go to the people who studied it and find out what they know. So David Levering Lewis is a 2-time Pulitzer Prize winner, and he spent 15 years of his life. Now, mind you, he can trace his ancestry back to the largest slave owner in the state of Georgia, who I'm sure if they knew that David was coming, he might not have gotten here. But what he did was he spent 15 years of his life researching that work. There used to be a thing called the NEH grant that was open to everybody. It seemed to have bobbed up and down and maybe back again. But what I had to do was, all of us English majors have to have math, because you have to get the money to make these films.
Mm-hmm.
And so in order to get that NEH grant, I didn't take 2 weeks, I didn't take a month. I took 6 months, and I researched and I wrote, excuse me, but I called David Levering Lewis and I said, would you help me? And he said, I saw the Marian Anderson, I'll certainly help you. And so I spent a lot of time with David, and then I started forming the story. And one of the things that happened was I had interns, and I wanted to make sure if young people understood who he was and what was interesting, then other people could. So the process was a ton of research, finding the people who knew the story, not depending on what was out there, but going to the people for whom it was important. And then it was, I like to say, like brushing hair. My sister Joyce will know this. My mother said, Rita, your hair was the most difficult hair on the block. And what she would do is put me between her knees and get a wet brush and start. And that's the way I brushed that story through. I had to put everything in it and come through it and keep coming through it and let what needed to fall out, because if it wasn't about Du Bois, it could hit the floor. But if it was about him, it had to stay. So that was that was my litmus test. And the last thing I'll say about that, you chase a story until it chase you. When I was doing the Maya Angelou, you have to listen. And she said, in the United Nations, Rosa Guy, the writer, her sister stood up and said, murderers, and people began to fight. This was when Patrice Lumumba was killed. I said to myself, if anything happens in the United Nations, there's a piece of footage on that, because they don't let anything happen there that's not taped. So now I chase that, and that is a scene in the film. So with Du Bois, I was running after Du Bois until he started running after me. And what I found was it was his writing that defined him. We had Frederick Douglass. He was an orator. At the best, he could cover a small amount of people. But when writing came into play, it was like the internet. Now, he was in the Atlantic, he was in papers, he was in the Crisis. And when his writing got there, and then he started writing about himself. So all of these things he said, I didn't tell on him, he said it. And so I was able to use, and I think he wanted to be known as a full person, which is why he said all the things he did. So that was the process.
Yes, he's very well documented by others and by himself. When you look at him then in this film, you see the historical figure, you also see the man, the flesh and blood man with his strengths. He had to be very brave to have spoken as he spoken during those times. He also had his flaws. When you were choosing what to put in and what not to put in, what were your considerations?
I didn't have any. What I always feel is that a person wants to be known. If you saw Bridges of Madison County, when Meryl Streep says she writes this diary and tells all of her business because she wants to be known. As people get to the end of their life, and some of us, I hope, at any point say, I want you to know me for who I am. And I think when I read about Du Bois's affairs and things like that, and the half has not been told, I did not stay away from that because it was part of who he was. And I did not feel that it diminished him. I felt that it was something that I didn't know about. It may have been something that I didn't agree with, but it was his story. It was not my story. So I am interested. So if I do a documentary on you, I'm gonna tell everything. So just know that. Just know if you did it and I find out about it, I'm gonna tell it. Okay. And so that was the litmus test. You did it. You told it. So did I.
You talk about breaking the story. What does that mean?
Breaking the story is, a lot of people use it for narrative, for fiction. But breaking the story is finding the point at which the person who is the common person who knows nothing, the person who thinks they know everything, and the figure that you're talking about when you're dealing with a subject versus subject matter, like the Vietnam War, that you're dealing with a person, is how can you put the soul of that person into other people? And when people become an icon, an iconic figure, it is because they have broken through the zeitgeist of the time, the box that has been laid out for everybody, and found a way through. Now they can pull you in because they touch all the parts of so many different people. And so for me, it was his writing. And it was the fact that education was poured into him in the North. Now, he took that education that was largely in a book, so he was reading, and most writers read a lot before they ever write. Then he was able, when he traveled, to see that it was true, to see that the world was bigger. And he did not feel like a diminished person. He felt like if they can do this over here, if this can happen in Great Barrington, he actually fell in love with someone in Germany, and they said, well, she can go home with you. And he said, no, she can. You don't understand. I live in two different realities. And when they break through to those realities, you break the story with them.
What we see is a journey in this film, and it starts with, we need to tell our own narratives because we are very multifaceted human beings. in our own hands. With him, you started with acknowledging that he discovered himself, this journey of discovering himself as a black man in this country, Mr. Alden. Yes.
Yeah, well, when he went to Fisk and he was among all of these black people, and
For the
very first time,
College.
and yeah, and they were beautiful and they were smart and they were courageous, and he said, from now on, I identify as a black man, and I want to help liberate black people. It's one of the things that I would add here. I think that we should be very careful not to glorify one man as if he made it all happen. To say that he did it alone, nothing happened until he showed up, is not correct. Du Bois had so many people who worked with him, students, other scholars, other activists like Ida B. Wells, and Anna Julia Cooper, and just so many other people. When you look at the exhibit that he put together for the Paris Exposition in 1900, there were all of these students at Atlanta University who got together and worked night and day to help make that. So I think it's very important to realize that Du Bois is also great because of the help, the company, and the assistance that he had. Finally, I do want to take the opportunity to thank you, Rita, because when I teach Du Bois, I've always dreamed of having something like this. And you know, writing and reading and so forth is one thing, but to actually see it as a film is something different. Finally, I would say too, I was asked this question and I didn't think of it then, but I would also recommend The Souls of White Folk that Du Bois wrote. It is a very powerful piece about how white supremacy works. And it is very informative about trying to understand this moment in history, this very troubling moment in our history.
Yes, he was very much about reclaiming our narratives in this world. He was very bold, I think, in switching from the Lincoln Party to Woodrow Wilson. I think that was very brave of him in that time, because black folks were voting Republican across the country. But changing over, he was always daring, but then felt betrayed by him. Once he got into office, Woodrow was the person who invited Birth of a Nation to be screened and praised the piece. That celebration that became the first blockbuster film in the United States was about racism, was about the denigration of black people, and the exalting of the KKK. He found himself in the in-between of things as he's trying to sort things through. Can you talk a little bit about that? Oh, well,
I think that's good for Gerald in that the art
I was
of the
come to
movie,
yes.
the art of images. And so I think that Du Bois understood the power of the pen. He understood the power of images.